Right. So, dear colleagues and dear students, well, this is an impressive, never-ending series of speeches you're going through. And usually that room has windows, but just to make it even more, confined, they locked everything so you don't have any access to the natural light. And the sad news is you're about to embark into the longest speech of this morning. You might have noticed that the dean and president and the dean, they left because they know it's going to be long and boring. So let me explain why I'm here. Are we okay that I have until 11:30? 11:30? So I sort of, the last obstacle between yourself and your lunch, on top of that. So indeed, right before the summer holidays, the school leadership took me off guard and asked if I wanted again to deliver this opening lecture. So of course I feel honored, pleased, so thank you very much for your trust. And I must say that it provides me with a pretty unique opportunity to wear this rather cool outfit, right? Because my wife insists that I should not wear this at home, so pretty much my only occasion. Now, the other main reason why I'm here, of course, is to try and deliver some thoughts at the very beginning of your studies here, thoughts somehow connected with my supposed expertise on a number of issues ranging from geopolitics, international relations, negotiation, and cooking also. I love cooking, but I'm not sure this is part of the topic today. I am indeed a political scientist. And as a political scientist, as a professor of political science here, I feel a little bit like a bizarre animal because in a business school, it's not that often that you bump into a political scientist. So let me explain a little bit. Politics as a science is the study of what Aristotle called politeia. Politeia is a Greek word simply to say how citizens try and create a community within some sort of state system. And nobody can deny nowadays that holding together a community, holding together a society, has become increasingly complicated. Don't know whether you had a look at the debate yesterday between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It tends to be rather polarized, and same thing here in France. The recent elections showed that the public discourse is getting increasingly polarized and stretching the social fabric of any politeia. Now, politics has also been the study of power since Max Weber, a sociologist at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. So the study of power dynamics, how power is distributed within the international system, within a society, within any sort of organization, even within, of course, a corporation. So how power is gained or lost, how power is concentrated or shared, unleashed or mitigated. These are really important questions for any organizations, including corporations. Now, as a political scientist, I've focused for the last 20 years on geopolitics, negotiation, which means that I publish papers in scientific journals, which nobody ever reads, but I have to do it because my dean says so. I've been lucky enough to gain hands-on experience from various assignments. I served as advisor to the French Prime Minister. I've been, together with Tina actually, mediator in far-flung, such as in the DRC, Congo. And I consult on a regular basis for the European Commission, for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for the Ministry of Defense, and all of that is pretty interesting. Now, this being said, and as a real starting point, I would like to congratulate all of you. You can give yourself a big round of applause. Also, this round of applause gives you a flavor of your relief when you will finally applaud me at the very end of the speech, but we're not yet there. I mean, congratulations, you've joined ESSEC Business School, and we're very proud, especially, to welcome so many students from everywhere on the planet. That is great. So welcome really. As a world school with French roots, we're so happy to see students every year coming from so far away. And maybe some of you have been lucky enough to be around during the Olympics. That was absolutely smashing. And as you could see, the opening ceremony provided you with a fast-track course on French history and also on our love for bizarre controversies. I carefully picked the picture of the ceremony I wanted to show you because I didn't want to prompt again this never-ending controversies. Now anyway, so especially dear students from abroad, I hope that you will feel comfortable in this new environment here, but we owe you a friendly warning. I mean, France is a peculiar place. And it's important to be aware of a number of local difficulties, such as this. Sure, the French people here realize which sort of heavy divide separating two sides in our country, a very sharp divide. And I'm not going to take part in that discussion, but it's true that in the yellow part of the map, people will call this a pain au chocolat, whereas on the reddish side of the map, they will call this a chocolatine. Now, more complicated, that's easy. More complicated. Subtle greeting protocols. Either 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4 kisses on the cheeks when you meet friends. With the additional difficulty, where to start? The left-hand side or the right-hand side is complicated. And I must say that probably the only positive aspect of the COVID pandemic was to streamline this complicated greeting protocol because fewer and fewer people kiss each other when they meet. Okay. You will also have to handle the subtle difference between tu and vous. Kindly advised to say vous to your professors. A coffee or a glass of wine in downtown cafes in Paris. You will soon be acquainted with our matchless state-of-the-art capacity of making simple things way more complicated, thanks to our state-of-the-art bureaucratic machinery. Not here at ESSEC, of course. Everything is so smooth here, but you'll get to know the fair amount of arrogance in French society, from the cafe waiter up to the CEO. That's sort of a common ground they have. And if you're very lucky, you'll bump into the usual strikes in the French public transport system. RER is part of. Okay. Now, and yet, a French writer, in France, you cannot deliver a speech without some sort of, connection with literature, of course, and food. Food, I've done it with the pain au chocolat / chocolatine thing, but literature. So Sylvain Tesson, French writer, wrote, I quote, "France is a paradise in which people think that they live in hell." To which another writer, his name escapes me, but I'm sure he's English, he wrote, "France would be a paradise without the French." But now, let's look at the hard facts, okay? For the 5th year running, France has been attracting more foreign direct investment than any other European countries. You can look at this map here, at this graph here, and as you could see, for the last 5 years, number 1 is France. UK used to be number 1, but then something happened in 2016 called Brexit, and since then, it's been a little bit down the hill. Now, I'm not sure of the correlation between this achievement and that next hard fact, which is that amongst all the countries on the planet, France is the place where we spend most time eating and drinking each day. Okay? Is there a correlation? I'm not sure, but who knows? Now, in spite of this tiny territory we are and modest population, modest in the sense of small, of course, not in the opposite sense of arrogant, but France remains the seventh largest economy on planet. French tech is booming. We're the second country in Europe for the number of fast-growing tech companies. According to the World Bank, France is among the easiest countries in which to start a business. And if we look at even more critical indicators, not simply GDP growth, France has the lowest poverty rate in Europe, with the exception of Finland. Life expectancy here is among the highest within OECD countries. And last but not least, we enjoy amongst the highest standards of human rights, with free and fair elections, freedom of speech, freedom of religion within your private sphere, freedom of sexual orientation. So it's fair to say that you're going to spend the next couple of years in a pretty cool place. And building on your first degree, you've joined a leading business school. Competition was high, so again, congratulations. Your presence here is indeed a success. And for this success, I would like to congratulate also your parents who supported you, your teachers, your professors in your previous studies, your friends, certainly, who cared for you in difficult times, your brothers, your sisters, if you have any, many others who were with you along the way. My point here is that we never succeed alone. Individuals succeed and thrive, of course, because of their own efforts, but also because they are part of a supportive ecosystem, a politeia. I mean, no matter how strong you try, if you are in DRC, in Congo, where Tina and I have been on many occasions, no matter how hard you try, you're not part of a supportive politeia. It's going to be super complicated. So success, to some people out there, and maybe to some of you, is simply the superiority of individualistic achievement. Now, here at ESSEC, since 1907, we hold a different view. And that view is that our individual fate depends not only on our actions, it also depends on what others around us do. And here at ESSEC, you'll do great things also because you will be part of associations, of student societies, achieving great things that you cannot achieve on your own because you will be part of a group, you will be part of a community. We are, that's a key word, we are interdependent. And interdependency is not naive idealism. It is the reality we're in. That interdependency is not new, of course, but it is even more crucial nowadays. And we have to be conscious and convinced of this common fate. And let me give you two examples of that. The first example is climate change. I mean, since 1990, 5 assessment reports from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have left no doubt. Global warming is there, and it results primarily from carbon emission related to human activities. And while every tiny effort matters, of course, solutions must be at the global level through multilateral efforts and negotiations such as the COP21 in Paris. There is no planet B, and that is a given for any project, any business, any activity. Second example, this common fate was also demonstrated by the COVID pandemic. Remember, in a few weeks, a virus coming from Wuhan, China, but it could have come from anywhere else, spread on a global scale. I've checked this morning, and the official death toll is slightly above 7 million people. Now, the dynamic of the virus propagation and then mitigation illustrated our interdependency, not simply at the global level, but also in the very functioning of our societies. Let me explain. In a book published in 2017, so that's before the pandemic, a British sociologist, David Goodhart, analyzed the growing distinction and to some extent divide in our developed societies between two categories of people. He distinguished those who are of anywhere. So people who were born in one place, have studied in another place, maybe in 2 or 3 different places, will work somewhere, will move to another place, and will be perfectly at ease because that's the way they've been educated, trained, and they speak 2, 3, 4 languages. And I would say that all of us in this room, we fit into that category. We are at ease anywhere. And of course, this second category of people, he called them people from somewhere. People who were born somewhere, they study or hardly studied in that area, they start working or strive to find a work in that area, and they hardly move all their life. And COVID demonstrated that people from anywhere rely heavily, because our societies rely heavily for their very functioning on people from somewhere, like nurses, primary school teachers, garbage collectors. I mean, honestly, without these people, our societies would rapidly collapse. Without a business school professor, would society collapse? No. No. So that showed again this very interdependency, which is both at the global level and also within the functioning of our societies. And that means that our world, our societies, need more cooperation, not less, more joint decision-making, not less, more pooling of resources, and less division of efforts. And that reality is embodied at a massive scale by something you've all heard of, and that is unique, and that is the European Union. Let me explain again. The EU typically, we were mentioning climate change, has pledged to become the first carbon-free continent by 2050. Now that is possible only because as a team of 27 member states, we pulled together enormous amount of tech, innovation, and resources. As we are the most important single unified market on Earth, with which the rest of the planet must trade and wants to trade, we also set the world's most demanding norms to protect the environment, to protect biodiversity, to protect consumers' health, to protect workers' rights. So thanks to the EU, collectively, we are norm setters. We set the rules of the game. We're not norm takers, which now the UK is since Brexit. So in a globalized world, because also of this interdependency, our sovereignty is not diminished by the EU, it is quite the contrary, it is protected by the EU. I mean, a few minutes ago, I showcased, in a typically French arrogant way, a number of successes of my country, France. But most of that performance would not be possible without EU membership. The EU is a patient construction of a politeia in the sense of Aristotle. It's not without any drawbacks, of course. Plenty of things should be improved, but it is a fact. And indeed, nowhere on this planet, nowhere else, and never before in history, have so many people, 450 million inhabitants, lived in peace for so long? Number two, with such a level of prosperity? Number three, with such a level of solidarity between generations, between social classes, between territories? And four, with such a level of human rights? Nowhere else on the planet at the moment, and never before in history, you have this combination of peace, prosperity, solidarity, and human rights. That's a fact. And most ESSEC students actually know that. Last spring, together with a colleague, Edouard Godot, we ran a survey. Remember, we were going to the European Parliament elections, so we had a survey. What do ESSEC students think about the EU? What are their perceptions? What are their expectations? And about 500 students responded. And here are the main results. 62% of ESSEC students have a positive perception of the EU. Only 16 had a negative perception, and 21 thought so-so. 75% think that the EU has had a positive impact on environmental issues, 73% on human rights. 75% of ESSEC students consider themselves to be, along their nationality, of course, but they consider themselves European citizens. And when we invited students to imagine 3 keywords to describe the EU, they massively picked positive keywords, such as solidarity, union, peace, freedom, rule of law, cooperation, prosperity. There were negative keywords, of course, such as bureaucracy, but they came far below in the list. So, if the EU is so nice, okay, why have our British